Is a 1099 employee entitled to workers' compensation? Morning, everybody. My name is Jim Aspel. I'm a board-certified workers' compensation attorney in Farmington, Connecticut. And we get that question a lot. And the first thing we need to understand is, what is a 1099 employee? What do I mean when I say that? A 1099 employee is generally what is known as an independent contractor. And that's somebody that does work for another individual who that second individual doesn't want to consider an employee. They look at them as a contractor, somebody that's doing work for them on a contract basis. They may do that for a number of reasons. They may do that for legal reasons. They may do that for tax reasons. If you're using somebody as an independent contractor as opposed to an employee of your business, then you don't have to pay payroll taxes. There are a number of other benefits to the independent or to the employer, such as it is, to use independent contractors and pay them on a 1099 basis. The question then arises, if that 1099 individual gets hurt while working for the 1099 employer, are they eligible for workers' compensation? The general answer is no, they're not. Independent contractors are not typically covered under that first employer's workers' compensation policy. That's part of the reason why they had them as a 1099 employee to begin with. So a couple of things. The 1099 employee, if that's what you truly are, you can obtain workers' compensation covering yourself in your own right. And that's something that if you're doing that kind of work, I would strongly suggest you do. That way, if you sustain an injury in the course and scope of your work as a 1099 employee working for somebody else, then you can avail your own policy for workers' compensation benefits and get your medical treatment and your income replacement in that fashion. And that's something I would suggest. If you haven't done that and you're doing work for somebody else who is paying you on a 1099 basis, then the analysis becomes a little bit more complicated. And if somebody comes to us and they say to us, well, we're paid on a 1099 basis, the analysis doesn't necessarily stop there. And what we have to do is figure out how much control that 1099 employer was exercising over the 1099 employee to determine whether or not they may actually, in fact, be eligible for workers' compensation coverage from the 1099 employer. And typically the types of things that we look at are the degree of control that the employer has over the work being done by the employee. So, for example, a lot of times we see this in the delivery space. Somebody's making deliveries for somebody as a 1099 employee. They're generally using their own car. So the analysis goes, well, who's setting the route? Who determines what order you're making your deliveries? Is there a set time that those deliveries have to be made within? And who's setting those parameters? Are you, as the employee, making those decisions, or is that something that the 1099 employer is telling you to do? And if the 1099 employer seems to have more control over how your workday is going than you do, then perhaps you're not, in fact, an independent contractor, even though the 1099 employer wants you to think you are, and you may have some coverage for workers' compensation there. The other scenario that we see it a lot are in contractors. And a lot of times people show up as subs. They're being paid as 1099 employees when, in fact, they're actually what would be considered employees, legal employees of the 1099 employer. So, in other words, the 1099 employer is telling them which job site to work on, what order to do the work, how do I want the work performed. Basically, you're looking at what they call indicia of control. So, in other words, how much control does the 1099 employer have over how you go about doing your workday? If it's one of those things where you're the contractor and you show up with your own tools and you say, well, I want to work on house A in the subdivision today, and then I'll go work on house B, and then maybe I'll go over and finish up something else on house C. In that instance, you're more likely than not a 1099 employee, an independent contractor, and in that situation, the 1099 employer has no obligation to cover you under workers' compensation. So in these 1099 scenarios, there's a lot of moving pieces. If you're being paid on a 1099 basis and you sustain an injury while you're doing that work, it really behooves you to sit down with a workers' compensation attorney and determine what your rights would be in that situation. You may have coverage, you may not have coverage, but it's a pretty complicated scenario, and it's not something that typically people are able to figure out themselves. In the workers' comp realm, it's also something that's probably going to be litigated. Generally speaking, 1099 employers are not going to roll over and say, oh yeah, we accept the compensability of this claim. The whole purpose that they were paying you by way of a 1099 as opposed to a regular paycheck means that they wanted to avoid this whole hassle, and they're not going to willingly go along with the process. So hopefully that helps. If you have any questions about the 1099 issues, feel free to give us a call. We're in Farmington, 860-523-8783. You can visit our website, www.aspelaw.com. There's a lot of good information there. We have a Facebook group, Ask a Connecticut Workers' Compensation Attorney. I would invite you to join that and ask any questions you may have there. Be more than happy to get back to you on that forum as well. If you found this video helpful, please feel free to hit the like button. And if you'd like to learn more about Connecticut workers' compensation topics, I invite you to hit the subscribe button. We drop these videos on a fairly frequent basis on various Connecticut workers' compensation topics, and we're more than happy to help you. Hope you have a good day and stay safe out there. Thanks.